It's my understanding that the DHS proposal would use $23.4 million in federal funds to change work expenses from a direct reimbursement to a work expense deduction. I was wondering if you could explain how that works and what's the reason for the proposed change.
Sure. One of the things that we found, as we talked a little bit about earlier, is we really haven't done a very good job, frankly, of serving the TANF population. And what we see is that we're not getting people to long-term positive outcomes. And in my mind, a long-term positive outcome is we get somebody off of TANF for good and we don't see them come back. And unfortunately, we often see with this population, they're just coming back. And so one of the things I get asked about a lot is the benefits cliff and how that helps or hurts people, and how losing those benefits too fast mean that people end up just in this cycle of getting right back on assistance. And so the work expense deduction is in here because we want to give people a longer opportunity to sort of ease into employment and make sure that they're ultimately successful and don't just come right back on our program. So the work expense deduction will allow people to have a little smoother transition as they're going into employment, hopefully so we can make it stick and so they don't return back to our programs.
And I appreciate that, because I think that's something that we've had great discussions about over the last few years, is the benefits cliff. But then the question is, how do you address it, especially with the mix of federal and state requirements and so on and so forth. With regard to the benefits cliff and this proposal, would the expense deduction apply only to TANF recipients who are working?
Yes.
Okay, so it would not be a general standard deduction, so to speak.
That's right.
Great. Can you explain how the federal funds come into that? So it's a $23 million federal funds proposal. How do those funds actually make this program work?
So this is part of our TANF block grant. So we get, I look to Dennis to tell us how much, but we get a pretty significant block grant that frankly pays, in Pennsylvania, it pays for a lot of childcare. That's where a lot of that block grant goes. But that's what is funding this proposal as part of that block grant.
Got it. Do you have any statistics that you can share with the committee as far as what the direct work expense reimbursements were over the past few years? Would that be something that that you could share with us?
We'd be happy to.
Sure. That'd be great. I'd appreciate seeing that. And then the other question I have is, would this be for participants in the TANF program that are working? Would the deduction be the same for everyone who takes the deduction, or would there be differences by individual?
My understanding is it's the same. Yes, it's the same.
A concern that I would propose to work into the computation on that is I think that when we're looking at under the current program, you've got the direct reimbursement, that's the word I was looking for, my apologies. The direct reimbursement would account for differences in expenses that individual workers have. So I would see a potential issue with a urban versus rural difference, where in a rural area you got people traveling more miles, maybe having to use their own vehicle versus having access to public transit. So would there be any way to account for those differences under the proposed program, and is that something you'd be willing to look at?
We could certainly look at that.
I appreciate that. I think that's that'd be very helpful. And then going forward, will you continue to offset earnings from employment from eligibility determinations after you move to a work expense deduction?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Will you continue to offset earnings? I guess currently earnings are only counted 50% against the threshold.
That does continue.
That does continue.
It does. Yes.
Okay. So the only other question I have is that pertaining to the threshold, has the department looked at proposing any adjustment to the threshold itself, as opposed to going to some sort of an exemption or some other sort of deduction? Has there been any conversations about proposing an actual change to the threshold itself?
Are you talking about the child care threshold?
No, the TANF grant eligibility threshold. The
TANF grant eligibility threshold. I don't think we've had conversations about changing that threshold.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it. That's all the questions I have. Thanks so much for the answers. Appreciate it.